right, welcome to solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula part 2. Part 2 is going to contain an example where we show this quadratic right here. We're going to solve it by factoring and then solving using the quadratic formula to show that both methods work. But ultimately our save all, the one that carries us through, or when in doubt, is our quadratic formula. So let's take a look at solve by factoring, which we did all the way through the third quarter. So here we go. So when I had you guys solve by factoring, I wanted you to identify A, B, and C in the quadratic in every problem. And we know that was part of our diamond, but it was really a good idea for us to start identifying the coefficients of our quadratic equation right there. So in this problem, of course, A equals 1. Remember, if there's no coefficient, it is 1. If that would be a negative x, it'd be a negative 1, so pay attention to your signs. B is 4. And C is negative 12. And so when we factor this trinomial, we are looking for two factors of negative 12 that add up to 4. So you'd be going ahead and looking at your list of factors. And remember, we made the diamond. The diamond is a way of organizing our information. So let's make our diamond. So remember, we get our top part by multiplying A and C. Okay, so that was one of the reasons for identifying our A, B, and C. We know when it has a coefficient of 1, it looks like it's just a back number. But when we do not have a coefficient of 1, we look for the GCF, and then we look ahead and multiply our A times C. Okay, and our B value is 4. Okay. So what we're simply looking for here, of course, is two factors of negative 12 that add up to 4. We've seen this problem, probably done this exact one probably a few times. So we get 6 and negative 2. Remember, it's really easy to kind of check to see if this is working out. Looks like everything's in place. And so our factoring would look like this. Now you can have negative 2 and 6, but it needs to be a positive 6 and a negative 2. And so when I asked you to factor the trinomial, you would have said, all right, this trinomial factors into x plus 6 times x minus 2. Then we went to solving. So we said, we set the binomials, or we set any factor with a variable in it equal to 0. So x plus 6 equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. We solve both problems for x, and we're going to take a shortcut here. And our final answer here would be the solutions, the roots, or that's the new word we're using, would be negative 6 and 2. And we know if we plug in negative 6 and 2 into the equation, we would get 0 equals 0, and we know our answer is right. Okay? So now let's look at the quadratic formula. So here's our second way of solving. So we've learned solving by factoring. So here's solving using the quadratic formula. And once again, we're going to start out with A, B, and C. And so let's put in A, B, and C. It's the exact as we just did before. Here's our 1. Our 4. And our negative 12. Okay? We're going to write down the quadratic formula. X equals negative b, plus or minus square roots, b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. And what we're going to do now is take our a, b, and c values and substitute in, okay? This is where if you go to any place on the internet, most people showing examples are going to show this substituting and plugging in. You'll notice that when I get to my examples, I'm not a big fan of this right here because the amount of mistakes that can be made. But let's just show it the way most textbooks or most people would go ahead and show it. So let's plug in. So we're going to say x equals negative b. Notice that we need to protect with parentheses. Plus or minus 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12. All over 2 times 1. I could have added some color to this, but since I'm not a big fan of it, I went ahead and just kind of left it all in black or whatever. This is the part that we're worried about the most, okay? This is where most of the mistakes will kind of take place. So I'm going to show you all this right here. I'm going to take a few shortcuts and evaluate, but here we go. So we're going to go x equals x equals negative 4. So notice how we clean that up. And then here, if we do all this right here, it would be 16 plus 48, which would give us the square root of 64. So I'm going to keep that in black. And of course, 2 times 1 is 2. So the red's the danger area, okay? This you really have to pay attention to. If b is positive, then notice this will come out to be negative. And if b was negative, notice that 2 negatives would make that positive, okay? But this is the area where most mistakes are made. Okay, so take a look at it here. We have our plus or minus. And remember, there are going to be 2 answers to most of the problem. In fact, well, we know what the 2 answers are. So let's see here. Negative 4, and the square root of 64 is 8. Sorry about that. I'm going to do this problem now, one with the plus and one with the minus. That's what you're going to hear me say often. Hey, there's 2 answers here, one with the plus and one with the minus. So that would be negative 4. Plus 8 over 2. Negative 4 minus 8 over 2. Now, whether you're doing this in your head or you're doing it with a calculator, the one thing you need to do is probably protect the top. On the calculator, if you just typed in negative 4 plus 8 divided by 2 without any parentheses, it would do negative 4, it would do the division problem first. So you got to make sure that you do the top. So either punch in negative 4 plus 8 and hit equals and divide by 2, or put parentheses, but we're going to get 4 divided by 2, which is 2. We're going to get negative 12 divided by 2, which is negative 6. put these answers together, you can see that solving by factoring and solving by using the quadratic formula will give us the same answer every time. Okay? Now, once again, you can be looking at these side by side and go, well, this is much easier. But remember, the reason why you learned how to solve by factoring, the reason why it seemed easy is because all the problems given to you would factor. But we've also talked about in class that not all trinomials are going to factor. Or when we say factor, we're talking about having integer type answers, rational numbers, fractions, or whatever. So we have to account for the fact that there's also answers out there with decimals, you know, whatever it might be. All right? I don't want to get rambling on a little bit. So on the surface, if you can ever solve by factoring, that's the way to go. Okay? And this looks like there's a lot of major work, but trust me, once you go through this and once you do these problems over and over again, it doesn't take as long as you might think. Okay? With that being said, I'm going to show you my steps. I do a 5-step approach to solving this. And one of the reasons why I like the 5 steps, or like the way that I introduce the material, is because we're going to put the discriminant in, which I think is an important piece, but it also saves us from maybe that part right there that could be so difficult. Okay? So make sure you have all this written down. You can pause the video or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and kind of erase that out. I kind of went too far. And we're going to go ahead and work example number 2, case 1, positive discriminant. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to use the discriminant here. We're going to solve using the quadratic formula. Okay, this problem does not factor. You might, oh, what about 2 times 1? The signs aren't going to work. This problem will not factor. Okay, and so I'm going to take you through a 5-step process how I want you to do the problem. You're going to see it more. There's a reason why I was using kind of the colors in here. So let's see how it looks. So here is step 1. You've seen this already before. Step 1, I'd like you to identify A, B, and C, because these are the numbers we have to work with, and I don't want you to keep coming back here every time, because that's where we lose signs. So, A equals 1, B in this problem equals 3, and C equals -2. Step 2. I want you to write the quadratic formula down every time. Remember, I told you it's something that I want you to memorize. You don't want to keep looking at it over and over again. So the more you write it down, the better chance of it being memorized. All right? Learn how to sing Pop Goes the Weasel. Learn how to sing whatever version you want on the internet. But I want you to write down x equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Part 3. Where the last problem we would just have you plug in and solve, we're going to go ahead and find the discriminant first, all right? And what it's going to do, it's going to eliminate us having to put all the numbers in here. We're going to basically, we're pulling it out and doing it all by itself. So, we're going to calculate b squared minus 4ac, and we're going to substitute in. It's going to look exactly the same here. Of course, we have new numbers this time. And so we're going to say 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2. And I think it's really important, remember that it looks like b squared minus 4ac, but when you punch that in the calculator, I don't want you to treat that as a minus. I want you to punch in negative 4 times 1 times negative 2. You've really got to watch your signs here. And that would be a positive 8. Which gives us 17, okay? So our discriminant is 17. If you go back to part 1 of the video, you'll see that if the discriminant is positive, if it's greater than 0, we have 2 real solutions. We know we're going to have 2 answers to this problem right here. Okay? So, as the quadratic formula might look intimidating, look at these steps here. You can do step 1. Step 2 is copying or memorizing. And step 3 is plugging in a problem that we might have done from junior high, where we're just evaluating expressions. Step 4. I want you to see step 4 as a template because these problems are solved the exact same way every single time. So x equals negative blank plus or minus the square root all over 2 blank. And because we didn't plug everything in all at one time, you only have to plug in the 3 places, and you'll notice I already have it kind of set up color-wise of how that's going to look like. Okay? So step 4 is just this template. Step 5, we're going to solve. So x equals negative b. Well, b was 3, and I can just put it right there. Plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. We just put a 17. So you don't have to do all this right here. Do it separately. And it also tells you something about your final answer. All over 2a, and this problem is 1. So now we're just going to clean up these 3 parts, okay? In our lessons right now, we're going to change 17 to a decimal. Maybe later this week or into week 4, we'll work with the radicals like we did earlier in the year. So this is going to be sorry about that. X equals negative 3. Now, I'm just going to hit the square root of 17 on my calculator. I think, let's go to 2 decimal places. So I rounded the square root of 17 is, we're going to round to 4.12. And then it's going to be simply 1 with the plus and 1 with the minus. Now I'm running out a little bit of room, so I apologize for that, but let's go ahead and do it right here. We get x equals negative 3 plus 4.12 over 2. And x equals negative 3 minus 4.12 over 2. So 1 with the plus, 1 with the minus. X equals negative 3 plus 4.12. So I'm going to put that in my calculator. I can protect with parentheses. Negative 3 plus 4.12. If I don't protect with parentheses, I got to hit equals. Divide by 2. And I get 0.56. And if I do negative 3 minus 4.12, I'm going to hit equals. And I'm going to take that answer, divide by 2. And I get negative 3.56. Remember we said there was going to be 2 answers to this problem. 0.56 and negative 3.56. And you can see it with brackets. You might see it written this way. There's all different varieties of how this can be written. Okay, so part 2, the quadratic formula, was to show you how solving by factoring and solving using the quadratic formula will give us the same answers. I know I erased this a little bit from earlier. And then I really want you guys to use the discriminant. This is the way I want you to do the problems that I'm going to assign to you. Okay? And the simple reason is it gives us a little info about what to expect, and it keeps us from really making major mistakes in here that has nothing to do with whether you know how to do the quadratic formula or not. All right? So this is part 2. In part 3, I want to show you the zero discriminant and negative discriminant, and that will kind of put all of our lessons together. So I'll see you in part 3.